but I actually, I should say that although I'm not an expert in basic income, I actually first heard of it on a podcast put out by the BBC about history. So, and they discussed this issue of basic income, and it was the first time that I heard about it, and it was in the context of, to everybody's surprise, it actually works and has multiplier effects, in the sense that for the amount that you put in, you get more benefit than you would think. So I think that the biggest argument in favor of basic income is probably the success that it's had in the places where it's been tried. I think that, and this is why during the discussion today I talked about the fact that we are wedded to this biblical idea of original sin and the need to labor, and the concept that, I think it was George Bernard Shaw who said that not so much that what St. Paul said about the love of money is the root of all evil. He said the lack of money is the root of all evil. And it's always interesting to me the way that people who actually have huge amounts of wealth manage to convince themselves that somehow they deserve it. Whether it's because of their class, their race, their status, their gender, they convince themselves that they work hard for their money, whereas the fact is that they don't. I mean, that's just a reality. And if you compare the amount of labor that they put in to the amount of labor that people who really work hard, 2 jobs, and not just the jobs, but traveling to and from the jobs, which is also, tremendously draining. If you compare all of those, you would see that it definitely isn't the work that you've put in. Or even if you say the multiplier effect of your parents' wealth. My parents invested in my education. I, in my turn, am able to invest in my succeeding generations' education. So I think that there are different ways in which people convince themselves that the system that we have is okay and is working. And being myself a believer in enlightened self-interest, I think that the way, it's not so much the poor man is not sleeping because he's hungry, and the rich man cannot sleep because the poor man is not sleeping. But nonetheless, you can't ignore that aspect of it, that those who think that the system we have now is sustainable are living in, I would say, a little bit of a delusion. Well, I think it stems from that, but it's always interesting to me, the kind of doublethink, if I can use that expression, that goes into somebody being a Christian, being extremely wealthy. And in the old days, it's now that you have people in professions, but maybe 200 years ago, a gentleman did not work. It was what defined you, that you just received income. And you managed to marry that with your Christianity and so on, and tell yourself that you were a good person, and you didn't sort of say that, yes, that I'm not labouring, but nonetheless I'm upholding my religion. So I think that there are there's always a measure of doublethink involved in most of these things. So it's always brought out when it's necessary to keep those who are poor and unable to work or not willing to work, and then say, well, you're a bad person, or you're. But in other societies, you have, for example, I don't know, I can't claim to be an expert, but I'm aware that in India or in Buddhism, you reach a stage where you say, okay, I'm done. I'm just going out and I will live on what comes to me. In the same way that even in the same Bible that people like to quote, the disciples were sent out and they said, don't take anything, just take your clothes and your shoes and preach the word. And some people will say, well, that's not working. Others would say that that's a different kind of working. We are wedded now to this idea of production and production and production, but as has been pointed out, the actual things that we produce are not necessarily tangible. I mean, I'm a lawyer, a legal practitioner, and I remember speaking to, when I started in practice, I was asking my principal, but what do we actually produce? How do we contribute? I mean, somebody who is a shoemaker knows that at the end of the day, they've got shoes. Or even if you're just one person tightening a nut in a factory that makes cars, you know that at the end of it, cars will come out. But what's our own contribution? And the answer came in the context of the kind of society in which people are free to produce, in which if you do produce or you have something, you can rely on having it tomorrow. It's not that somebody will just come and knock you over the head and take it over and so on. So there are different levels of production, but I no longer pretend that I need to work and work and work.
Yeah.
There are some things I can't afford and I will never be able to afford, and I'm not going to kill myself because I can't afford them. I mean, but in the mornings, my daughter leaves the home at 7:10, and I'm probably still in bed, unless I'm going to court. And she's saying, she's waiting to get to the time when she doesn't have to go to work from 7:30 till 7:30 every day, and so on. And I said, well, there was a time when I used to be like that too. And I do go to the office, but I don't sort of feel that it's a federal offence if I don't go anymore. Well, I think there are two aspects. I mean, that certainly from an ecological point of view, I'm not an economist again. Mm-hmm. So for me, the idea that economies have to keep on expanding even when the population is not expanding. I mean, I can understand, in Nigeria, the population is expanding. So it's understandable to me if I would say the economy needs to expand because there are more people to take care of in that economy. But when the population isn't expanding, what is the purpose of growth for the sake of growth? I personally don't necessarily get it, but you hear the news will say, oh, such and such country is in recession, that the economy has shrunk. And, it's a question, well, shrunk from what? What was it before? So I think there's that, that's one part of the issue of sustainability. But then I think there's also the human nature part of sustainability. I will not pretend to have read the book Sapiens, but fortunately, because I'm always listening to things, I've heard it being read as the book of the week. And one thing that struck me was the extent to which a lot of these things that we do and say depend on everybody buying into it, everybody believing it. If you don't understand aerodynamics and you get into a plane, you sort of tell yourself, if we all stop believing, this plane could crash out of the sky. Now, fortunately, because the laws of aerodynamics don't work like that, even if I don't believe, the plane is not going to crash out of the sky. But some of the economic systems seem to depend on that. I mean, I looked at what happened after 9/11 in the US, and the exhortation was, go about your business as normal. Go out and shop and buy things and credit and so on and so forth, because the bigger danger was that the economy could shrink as a result of it. Of course, as a result of 9/11, bigger economies, new industries, all sorts of things came out. Or even if you talk about Brexit now, the thing is a clear disaster, and yet the people who propound it are talking it up, and it's going to be a great, beautiful future. And it's almost as if we all have to believe in this thing by force, and it's only if we stop believing it and stop telling the world that we believe in it. Because if the world suspects that we don't believe it, they won't come and invest in our country, and then it really will be a disaster. So it's almost as if the whole carapace depends on this imagination. But the concept of money, the concept of credit, all of these things, if people said, well, yeah, you've got it on paper, but this is my land, then what happens? you have to have people saying, no, 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 we have to defend this idea of this person having money. And if the willingness to buy into that ceases because of its the injustice that is building up, then it could collapse. And that's what I mean by it may not be as sustainable as it appears to be.